Hello, everyone, and welcome to Earth Refuge's Faces interview. I'm James Sedlak, a volunteer correspondent, and on today's episode, I have Jon and Martha, a family living in Sonoma County, California, a well-known area for wildfire. So without further ado, let me introduce Jon and Martha. How are you guys doing today?
Doing well.
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for participating. So could you tell us a little bit about where you live in Sonoma County and just kind of the type of environment that is?
Yeah. We live in a small town called Sebastopol, California. It's in the western part of the county. In terms of kind of the natural landscape, it's where, on the eastern part of Sonoma County, we have a lot of oak woodlands. And where the oak woodlands and kind of start meeting more of where the redwood forest would grow, we live in that area.
Gotcha. And Martha, I understand that you own a small wine business. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works in your particular environment?
Yeah, I own a small wine label. I don't own any of the vineyards I work with. I both lease vineyards and I purchase fruit from growers. I work in a fairly large radius. So I work as far north as Redwood Valley in the Ukiah area of Mendocino County, and as far kind of southeast as Contra Costa County, which is about a 40-minute drive east of Berkeley, California.
And so can you tell us a little bit about the local environment and any changes that you've seen working outside and dealing with kind of climate and weather and your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I started in the wine industry in 2006 and was working all over the world, but still had kind of a pulse on California and this region. And what went from a winemaker trying to just make the best wine for the vintage and noticing that there's a little vintage variation. Now our mind, we have to go to, it's so dry. How do we make sure we have a crop? How do we make sure we can make any wine? So it's definitely the calculus has changed a little bit from, what are the small differences that the vintage is going to carry this year to how do we not have catastrophic loss? And it's definitely drier. I dry farm my vineyards, which means I only rely on the rainfall and the water profile in the soil. So no irrigation is done in the vineyards. And so I notice very large swings in the yield of my grapes every year, depending on whether we're in the third year of a drought or not. So it does seem like the rain when it does rain in the winter, we're getting larger, kind of more torrential rains that aren't able to soak into the soil profile as much. And then we are getting really long dry periods.
And do you feel like these drier periods are starting to seriously jeopardize your business, or is it just something that you just have to adapt to?
Oh, it's definitely jeopardizing our business. So the dry period, potential increase in vegetation in wet years and then followed by immense dry periods is causing a lot of fuel for fires. And the fires themselves, while vineyards oftentimes actually act as fire breaks. So a vineyard up against a forest, you might have a fire and it moves through the forest and then reaches the vineyard and slows down because it's just less fuel for the fire. But what we do worry about is smoke. So smoke is in the air everywhere, and it's tremendously detrimental to the crop. You get smoky flavors that can show up in the wine. So smoke is absorbed in the skin of the grape, and but they bind to sugar. And then when sugar is fermented into alcohol, those compounds are released. So you don't know when you're picking your grapes if your wine is going to taste smoky until after it's done fermenting. So you've already spent all of your money on raising the crop, picking the crop, making the wine. and then it can be spoiled. And we don't have proper ways to test for this. So it's a huge problem in the industry. Last year, when we had these really significant wildfires and widespread smoke, for instance, I just read today, Napa's harvest was down 43%, which is huge. So many grapes were going unpicked.
And that's a huge local economy.
Oh yeah, that is
right?
The local economy. In Sonoma and Napa, you know, maybe you're a dentist to work on the teeth of everyone in the wine industry. The wine industry is the place that people work.
So could you say that maybe some of these climate-induced natural kind of changes are causing real strains on local businesses and, might not be able to sustain communities as they once used to?
Yeah, I wish I had, the data is still coming out. I wish I had better data, but I mean, the strain is immense. It is hugely impactful. I cannot overstate it. It's really hard.
Yeah, that sounds really difficult, especially since it's a slow going process, that you're seeing kind of evolving over time. And have you guys ever experienced, big fires kind of, knocking at your doorsteps or any other like types of like big environmental threats?
Yeah, well, we had last year, our son was born on October 23rd, and he was born in the Santa Rosa Kaiser Hospital. And a few days after he was born, we were actually getting ready to get packed up and come home, but they ended up evacuating the hospital due to fire threats. So this was like the night, it's around like midnight. And so we ended up leaving about 3 a.m. It was the strangest drive because everything was just, the power was out. So it was just black streets and like a black sky. And like, there's like branches and leaves blowing across the highway and like nobody's out. And it was our first time like having like our child in our Camry, and he was like in this car seat. And it was just such a surreal, weird drive, because your life had changed having a kid. And then to like step outside and get on the highway and just everything looks and feels different. It was so weird. So we ended up getting home, but we could kind of sense that like, oh, we might actually have to leave our home. So we were in Santa Rosa and we came to Sebastopol, and sure enough, like we kind of just ended up restocking. And like 30 minutes later, we found out, oh, we need to evacuate Sebastopol. So we got back in the car and ended up staying with some friends in Berkeley. So it ended up being kind of an all-night affair. We got in there around like 6 a.m. And then their power was out, which was just kind of amusing, trying to change diapers for the first time with headlamps.
Yeah.
Wow, that is incredible.
Yeah.
And wait till you tell your son that one day. What a story.
I know. Yeah.
So how long were you evacuated?
We evacuated for, I believe it was 4 or 5 days mandatory evacuation. We ended up staying with our friends in Berkeley for about a week just because we had a newborn and he had been in the NICU for the period of time leading up to when we were evacuated. And he had some trouble breathing, so we didn't want to bring him back home where it was much smokier. Even though the mandatory evacuation had been lifted, we spent a few extra days down there just till the air cleared.
It was also, it was a really rough time, but I think when you have a kid, you're sort of geared up to just sort of do whatever you need to do to take care of them. So in a way, it was sort of like just one thing after another. And I was like, okay, well, I guess we're going to Berkeley. All right, let's do that. And when we did get there, we did find that it was kind of fun hanging out with our friends. It sort of felt like we were sort of forced into like a long sleepover party. And, especially like having a new baby and you don't know how anything works. Our friends had a kid just a few months before us. And so they were helpful. And so that was kind of the bright spot. It ended up being sort of a sweet experience, even though it was sort of calamitous.
Yeah. But there is part of me that worries, okay, when and be like, hey, can we come live with you for a week every year to the same people? And so, and I think about my parents who still live in the area and they didn't really have anywhere to evacuate to. And so they were talking about trying to go, like, if they really needed to leave, they would go to the beach and camp. And I don't know. I mean, my parents are great people, but I was thinking to myself, you guys are in your late 60s. If you're still living here in 5 years, are you going to be early 70s going out, like evacuating yourselves and trying to camp on a beach for who knows how long? Like, that's not sustainable.
Yeah, yeah. Were you guys worried about your home and your parents' home and while you're leaving?
I was, well, so we rent. Not to say that that lessens it. You do worry about your things. We definitely, got our rental insurance in line and everything. I was not so worried about that during that circumstance. Also, I had just had an emergency C-section. Our child had just been in the NICU. We had to evacuate twice. And it was kind of lower on the totem pole of stress for me.
Yeah.
But I do think about it. I do think about it a lot. And I worry, certainly when we would love to buy a house in the area. And I'm constantly trying to triangulate, okay, where are we going to be still? Where will fire insurance still exist in Sonoma County? Where can we live in? Can we find a place where there's like 3 or 4 exits that's not a one-way street up a canyon or something like that? So it's on my mind. And ever since we had the hospital bag packed that we then just evacuated with, we have our go bag packed. We have our emergency supplies all the time. So,
did you guys feel like you had ample support during that whole evacuation process, whether it be from local government officials or like clearly labeled, evacuation routes, or just you knew the right number to call for assistance in your community, anything like that?
I was hugely impressed with so Jon said last year, but this was actually 2019 when our son was born. And after going through the Tubbs fires, I was further away from them, but my younger brother lived in Santa Rosa. From 2017 to 2019, it was night and day. 2017 felt like really scary, total chaos. And while the threat of fire is still really scary, the reason they evacuated us is because they didn't want first responders to have to go knocking door to door and to have to spend their time and energy letting the community know they had to evacuate before they went and started fighting fires. So in 2019, we had Nixle alerts, we had all sorts of communication. I felt like, it's still scary, but we knew our evacuation zone, we saw maps, there was a lot more support. And I felt like, great, they're evacuating us early. I'd rather be evacuated rather than waiting till the last minute. I don't know. I saw a lot of big changes happen between 2017 and 2019.
Well, I mean, it sounds like an insane experience to go through, especially with a newborn son. So you guys are super impressive. Now that you've been living with, fire for a few years, how have you guys adapted your lifestyle? And maybe Martha, how have you, changed your business outlook as well?
Mm-hmm. Well, before I got into winemaking in my undergrad, I studied environmental studies, and I had taken a climate change course long before it was ever a word that was publicly even talked about. And I feel like being in agriculture for so long, I have tried to build my business in a way to make it as flexible as possible. So really thinking about when you're building a business or when you're planting a new vineyard or choosing what grape to plant, what vine material, all comes from a place of how do I minimize the effects of climate change, the effects of smoke, of fire, of extreme weather. And so, if a grape is exposed to smoke and I can't ferment it on the skins, which is how you make red wine, then maybe I have to make rosé only that year. And are my customers accustomed to me not consistently making the same thing year in and year out? And I feel like I've tried to prime them for that. So when climate change has escalated, the effects of climate change have escalated, that my business is already resilient enough to hopefully absorb some of that. We definitely think sometimes, I mean, I ask myself, am I going to be able to do this in 5 or 10 years? And it seems like I asked myself, am I going to be able to do this in 30 years, 2 years ago? But now today I'm asking myself, am I going to be able to do this in 5 or 10 years? It seems like the runway is getting a little shorter.
Wow. And, with that runway getting shorter, you had mentioned you guys might be thinking or thinking about possibly buying a home in the area. Has the question of leaving and going somewhere without these threats, has that crossed your mind?
Yeah, it's something it's something I think everybody thinks about, and in my experience and from talking to other people, you think about it the most when the smell of smoke is hanging in the air and the sky looks like the apocalypse is coming down upon you. And then when it's a beautiful, kind of sunny, warm winter day in the middle of January and the grass is popping up, maybe you're not thinking about it so much. But it's definitely something that we think about. And I guess the question is really like, where else would you go? And like, Martha has such a incredible business that she's been developing in the midst of all of this, and all these grapes are in California, and it's one of the most amazing places in the country for viticulture. And so even though there are all these challenges around it, it's not really like that many other places that could be an appropriate substitution for that. And there is this kind of resilience, I think, that a lot of people in California feel because nature here is so bountiful, and when it it's just so many beautiful foods and things that come out of California, that I think there's still a lot of potential here, even though there are all these challenges.
Sure. Do you guys know anyone that has moved away as a result of the wildfires?
Yeah.
Did they move far, or did they move kind of just somewhere more coastal?
Yeah, two couple friends of mine, so 4 people, actually all moved to the North Fork of Long Island. So there's some viticulture there, because they were tired of the, I don't want to say fire drill, but tired. I mean, it was just year in and year out and pretty persistent. And it's kind of luck of the draw. This year, I was able to make some wine in 2020, but there were a lot of wineries that weren't able to make any wine. And when you're a young business and you're already in a very expensive area, the Venn diagram of so expense and then like environmental threats and like here's your survival in the middle, I just feel like it's just really precarious. It does feel that way. And I do have friends who've moved away.
And for your other community members that have stayed for, I'm sure, reasons that Jon have mentioned, have you guys have you seen people develop new resilience practices and come together as a community to kind of build that grassroots adaptation?
Yeah, in the wine industry, I mean, people are very supportive and definitely extremely communicative. There's a network of people trying to help one another out. But at the end of the day, if the grapes are ruined, even if you're trying to tell people how to get, a different route past a fire zone in order to logistically get your grapes back to your winery or things like that, if the grapes are ruined, you can't really do much about it. But we do have a friend who was working with it was this project sponsored with the UC Davis Extension. It was kind of a pilot project, and I don't know how far it will take off, but it was, she works in rangeland management. And the idea was ranchers in the area doing prescribed burns and really, training them and almost using like a cattle branding model where one rancher will come to another rancher's property, like everyone will convene on one rancher's property and do the prescribed burn. And then those ranchers will all move to another rancher's property and do this prescribed burn because you just need a lot of hands. So there are, people are definitely trying to come together and find solutions.
Have you guys ever thought about what kind of resources might be really valuable to people in your shoes or other residents of California or similar kind of geographical areas when thinking about migration and these issues involved?
Yeah, I think if there was some more clarity on honestly what insurance companies were going to do, I think that's a big thing. A lot of people my age who are about ready to want to try to buy a home here want to know is, am I going to face catastrophic loss and not be insured for it? And can we, or is, California going to actually set aside enough money for an emergency insurance fund? So that's a thing that I think about a lot. I also think about what happens if our cell phone service goes down, because that is like kind of the heart of the communication. So without cell phone service, if we had to evacuate, I don't know what the plan is there. So that I think would be a resource. But for people migrating, I don't know. It's just, I don't know how to stop the exodus.
Sure. I guess it is, it is sort of a convenience, the wrong word, but I think this kind of 1-2 of the wildfires and then also this pandemic that we're in, I think it's shown a lot of, companies that they can function well remotely. So I guess that's something that's kind of good is I feel like companies are now embracing kind of a hybrid approach where, if 10 years from now, there's some massive disruption in a certain part of the country and people do need to migrate, there's already, those companies have already been through stuff like that. They know that they can adapt and they can support their employees. And so I think that's kind of good to see that we've started to, in some forms of work, right? Obviously winemaking is not one of them, that, at least for certain types of work that, is possible for them to happen anywhere, instead of just in one specific geographic location where you have to commute into a city every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that's been an interesting interplay and conflict. So Jon works in technology and I obviously work in agriculture and winemaking, and seeing, just increased housing prices in general in California. And a lot of that had to do with tech money and tech pressure. And home prices have always been increasing, but, moving into agricultural lands too, there's a bit of kind of, I don't know, potentially some of that remote work could alleviate, give a little pressure release to that sort of tension between agricultural lands and housing prices. And I don't know though. Yeah, it's really hard for me to pick up and move. So
sure. It's I've heard in some other interviews that it's also hard to really kind of create a good incentive. People are hunkered down and this is their livelihood, their perhaps their legacy, So how do you really create people to move out of harm's way if they're also starting to build resilience and adapt to things and, learn from things like a pandemic, like Jon, you had mentioned. So it's a tricky question.
Yeah.
Do you guys have anything else you'd like to share, whether it be just on the topic of climate changes, migration, something specific to your community? I'll leave the floor open to you.
Yeah, I think in a very local sense, definitely the fires and climate change has really made me focus in on, okay, I don't want to live up in the hills in a forest where that wasn't something, I'm looking more towards what's the vegetation around me? What are the wind patterns? In many ways, it's gotten me, I've always been in touch with nature because of agriculture, but it's definitely gotten me much more in touch with nature and how all these systems work, which has been really interesting. But yeah, I'd say it's probably the topic Jon and I talk about the most. Do we stay? Do we go? Where do we try to carve out a little home? There's no answers. Yeah. We talk in circles about it often.
You forget how special places are. It's easy to kind of get accustomed to how great the place you live in is, and especially if you live in such a beautiful kind of place like Northern California, and you go to other places and you realize oh, this is not, everywhere is not like this. It's interesting.
But you do, I think, become very emotionally attached to your home. And whether or not you recognize it's an emotional attachment and that's the reason you're there and it's not rational, or as rational as maybe it should be, those ties are extremely strong. My family's here. I love the environment here. Jon and I love living here. Even if we now have air filters and N95 masks on hand and all this other stuff, I don't know if it'll get old to a point where we'll actually make the move.
Martha and Jon, that's all the questions I have for you today. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and open up about your personal experiences. And I think you serve as a role model for others dealing with climate migration issues. Proving to be resilient and looking to be optimistic about the future. So thanks so much for your time.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Our pleasure. Thanks so much.